On Thanksgiving, my brother, the one who constantly took money but never repaid, lifted his glass and said, "You'll handle dinner, right?" I refused. Next morning, he arrived with the bill anyway. But when he looked at the receipt, his hands trembled. And the real shock was still to come. You know, sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who can hurt you the deepest. For years, I watched my own brother systematically chip away at my trust, twisting family loyalty into a personal ATM, but I never imagined he'd go this far. I never imagined he'd hold my private life hostage, weaponizing my hard-earned success against me in front of our entire family. And when he did, when he tried to turn my own parents against me with a stack of papers, that's when I finally realized the game was over. My name's Caleb Hart, and I'm 32. I'm the kind of guy who finds a strange satisfaction in the quiet logic of numbers, the way grocery receipts line up perfectly by date, the simple elegance of everything adding up. I'm not rich, I'm not famous, and I'm definitely not flashy. I run a small bookkeeping practice, just making a steady living, but I like things to make sense. And that last part? That really matters. Because in my family, nothing ever added up, at least not when my older brother, Evan, was involved. Evan, he's a different species. He's the type who thinks a handshake is a contract and a promise. Well, that's just a suggestion, conveniently forgotten when the next surprise car expense or sudden pet emergency conveniently lands in the envelope marked Caleb's patience. We grew up in the same house, sat at the same wobbly-legged dining table, learned from the same parents. But watching us handle a simple coffee shop check, you'd swear we were raised on different planets. My mom, bless her heart, always says Evan has a generous spirit, just a complicated relationship with follow-through. My dad, though, the quiet one with the long memory and a knack for mental arithmetic, he always called it what it was, borrowing without the math. And somewhere between my mom's soft, sympathetic tilt and my dad's resigned, quiet counting, Evan learned a skill. He learned that if he framed a debt like a favor, and a favor like family loyalty, suddenly the numbers would just soften. "Come on, man, it's me," he'd say, and apparently, "it's me" was the ultimate coupon code for free. When I was younger, I didn't see the pattern. In high school, when Evan forgot his wallet and I, a junior with a fresh driver's license, covered our burgers, it felt like a cool, small gesture. When he borrowed $20 for gas, promising to pay me after his night shift, it seemed natural. He was working more, he'd make it, right? But there's this weird line that generosity crosses, and it just keeps on walking, right past the point of reason. One summer, it escalated. He borrowed enough from me, just until payday, just until this client pays, just until my tax refund clears, that my own rent got tight. He didn't see the late fee I paid, the email from my landlord, the hot flush of embarrassment in my stomach. He only saw the relief of another, "Thanks, you saved me. I'm good for it," before he moved on to the next thing. Thanksgiving has always been our family's anchor. My mom ties an apron around her waist like a superhero cape, and by dawn, the house smells like butter and cinnamon. The parade plays on the small kitchen TV, and the guest list has been the same for years. My parents, Evan, me, our cousin Sophia, the only one who brings a salad anyone actually finishes, Uncle Rob, who still tells the story of the winter of '98 like we weren't all there, and Aunt Marie, who has a knack for wrapping criticism in a shiny ribbon of a compliment. Everyone brings something: pies, bottles, stories. We clink glasses, talk over each other, and for a few hours every year, it almost works. But for the last few Thanksgivings, something had shifted. There was the year Evan forgot to pick up the turkey he'd volunteered for, walking in with a single bag of dinner rolls. There was the time he hinted through the entire meal that his car insurance unexpectedly doubled, then conveniently forgot his portion of the groceries later. My parents spun it as Evan having a streak of bad luck. My accounting software, however, would have labeled it a recurring expense. There's one particular memory that keeps clawing its way back to me when I think about this. It was my mother's 60th birthday. We went out for a fancy dinner downtown, the kind with a host who projects his voice like a gentle librarian. A beautiful meal, small plates arriving like thoughtful presents. At the end, the server set the check folder in the middle of the table, heavy and discreet. I watched Evan's hand hover, then retreat. He picked up his water glass instead and said, "Caleb's been doing well, right, buddy?" It was a joke, but it absolutely wasn't. Everyone chuckled uncomfortably, the way people do when someone casually rearranges the furniture of a social expectation. I paid that night. It was my mother's birthday, and I'm not the son who creates a scene. On the walk to the car, she hugged me, grateful and apologetic. "He means well," she said. I didn't reply. I just folded the receipt into my wallet, numbers down, as if turning the math face first into darkness would somehow change it. This year, in the days leading up to Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed with the usual family chatter. My mom sent a photo of pie crusts cooling on the porch. Uncle Rob asked if he was supposed to bring cranberry sauce or green beans, and then brought both, just to be safe. Aunt Marie sent a link to a fun holiday conversation starter deck, which we all ignored. And Evan, 2 days before the holiday, called me with that airy tone he uses when he's hoping a kind wind will push him over a bump. "Hey, little brother," he started. It's always little brother when there's a favor brewing. "Quick question. Could you swing by and pick up dessert on your way? They're holding a pumpkin cheesecake under my name at this bakery on 4th. There was a pause, the kind that's supposed to be too small to notice, but still asks for something extra. "Evan," I said carefully, "are you asking me to pick it up or to pay for it?" He laughed, genuinely surprised I'd asked. "Come on, just grab it and I'll." He wound around the sentence like it was traffic. "Sort it out with you later." There it was again. Asterisk later. Later. Later, asterisk, I said I'd pick it up. He texted me the order number. Thanksgiving morning, I woke up early, ran a quick loop around the neighborhood. Cold enough to make me feel awake, not cold enough to bite. My mind did its usual numbers dance. The cost of the cheesecake, the groceries my mother had already poured herself into, the wine I'd bought, that little line on my budget that read family holidays, like a gentle joke. I showered, put on my sweater, the one I reserved for exactly 2 occasions, holidays and meetings with new clients, and drove to the bakery before the line formed. When I gave the clerk the order number, she nodded, disappeared, and returned with a box that looked like it could comfortably house a small cat. "That'll be $96, she said. I blinked. I'm not one to quibble with dessert prices, but $96 for a pumpkin cheesecake made even my generous heart flip through a mental menu of simpler options. I paid. I could hear Evans sort it out later in my head, and I decided that later would need a date attached this time. I folded the receipt into my wallet, numbers up. By late afternoon, my parents' house hummed like a friendly machine. The radiator clicked inside, the oven door opened and closed with the rhythm of a heartbeat, and the dog wove around our legs like a soft, persistent rumor. My mother fussed over the seating arrangement while pretending not to fuss. "I'm not fussy," she said, moving place cards by a hair. "I'm thoughtful." Evan arrived with dramatic timing, 10 minutes later than promised, 15 earlier than rude. Enough to be noticed, but not enough to complain about without seeming petty. He walked in carrying a bottle of something whose price tag suggested he'd won a gift basket at an office raffle. He kissed my mother on the cheek, clapped my father on the shoulder, and held his arms out toward me like a quarterback celebrating a last-minute touchdown. "There he is," he said, "my guy. You get the cheesecake?" I lifted the box and set it on the counter. "I did," I said. "We'll settle up later." He smiled, easy and bright. "Of course," he said, as if the topic were a balloon he could tie to a chair and forget. Sophia arrived with her salad, a colorful tangle that even Uncle Rob devours like he's discovered vegetables for the first time. The house expanded around the noise, the smell, the soft traffic of people crossing the same patch of tile and apologizing for it. It felt almost normal. And that's what made what followed feel like stepping into an echo you forgot you created. We sat down. My father lifted his glass for the opening toast, a simple thank you for health, for food, and for the miracle of my mother's pies. Then Evan, as if his hand had been tugged by a string, stood up with his glass and grinned. "Before we dig in," he said, and there was a particular pitch his voice took on when he was about to charm his way into a favor. It was warm without heat, soft without weight. He looked around the table with a theatrical pause, the kind that invites people to lean in. "Caleb's got this," he said, his smile widening. "Right, buddy? You'll cover dinner." It was a simple sentence, but it didn't belong in that room. People don't cover dinner at a family Thanksgiving that my mother had been preparing since the leaves were still green. We weren't out at a restaurant. No server would set a leather folder between the salt and the pepper. We were in our childhood home, with the nick in the table that looks like a little crescent moon. But I understood immediately that Evan wasn't speaking literally. He was speaking in that code he'd perfected. Asterisk Caleb will cover what needs covering. Groceries, dessert, wine, the last-minute thing, the intangibles, and we'll all smile like this is how families show love. Asterisk 4 years. My response would have been the path of least friction. A laugh, a wave of the hand, a don't worry about it, and then an internal promise to revise my budget. But lately, the math had been louder than the mood. I felt the old habit lift and hover above me like a coat I no longer needed to wear. I set my glass down. The room did that subtle shift where everyone becomes aware that something unscripted is about to happen. My mother's hands fluttered near her napkin. My father watched me, his eyes steady. Sophia glanced between us, curious. I smiled, calm. No, I said. It wasn't sharp or dramatic. It was simply a word that shows up when you put it on your calendar and give it a date. Evan laughed like I'd made a joke. Come on, he said. Don't be a hero. I kept my voice even. I'm not covering anything that you volunteered for, I said. If you wanted to bring dessert, fantastic. If you wanted me to pick it up, that's fine. But we'll settle up, and I'm not playing the part you've written for me at these dinners anymore. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a speech. I just told the truth, and it sat there like something heavy and honest in the middle of the table. For a second, I saw something like surprise flicker across his face, followed by that old practiced ease. He lifted his glass again, this time shrugging. All right, he said. Don't make it weird. Let's eat. The table exhaled. My mother poured gravy with an extra tilt of concentration. The dog snored in the corner. And yet, even with my small no resting between us, I felt something new opening inside me. A place where my own needs didn't have to apologize for existing. Through the first course, Evan was quieter than usual. He made a show of complimenting the turkey, of asking Sophia about her new job, of laughing a little too hard at Uncle Rob's story. But I could feel his attention circling back to me like a searchlight. He asked about my business with the same overly bright interest you hear when someone scans a menu they can't afford. So, big year, taking on new clients? I nodded, non-committal. Steady, I said. Good. He pushed a little more. Still working with that restaurant group, the one with the wine bar? I met his eyes and smiled. Some of them, I said, and stabbed a piece of green bean like it owed me money. After dinner, as the dishes shifted to the kitchen, and everyone pretended not to keep eating while they cleaned, Evan cornered me near the sink with the kind of casual posture that wasn't casual at all. About the cheesecake, he said. You know, I'll take care of it. I flicked the faucet off and handed him the receipt folded. Perfect, I said. He tucked it into his pocket like a magician slipping a card up his sleeve. Then he clapped my shoulder. You know you're my guy, he said, the words both affectionate and calculated, and walked away. I'd love to say I didn't think about it again that night, but that would be a lie. I thought about it while I packed leftovers into containers and labeled them with a marker. I thought about it while we stood in the doorway saying goodbye 3 times, the way families do when none of the words are the actual words they want to say. I thought about it as I drove home with the radio low, the city quiet in that holiday way, the streets wide and emptied like a stage after the curtain falls. I couldn't tell if I was proud of myself for saying no, or if I'd only managed to kick the can down a different road. Still, I slept better than I expected. The next morning, the house was gentle and still. I made coffee and watched the steam rise, that small domestic theater that makes you feel like you're doing something important. I had plans. A walk, calls with 2 clients who delayed invoicing until after the holiday, maybe a movie if I could convince myself to sit still long enough. I just sat down at my kitchen table, the one without a nick, the one I'd bought secondhand but sanded myself, when my phone buzzed. Evan, of course. Morning, little brother, he said when I answered, cheerful like a man who's already decided the day will be kind to him. Got a sec? Thought I'd swing by. I've got something for you. He said the last part as if he were delivering a trophy and not, say, a folded piece of thermal paper. Sure, I said, I'm home. He was outside. 12 minutes later, which meant he'd been on his way before he called. He walked in without waiting for me to say, come in, which is a small thing and a big thing at the same time. He looked around. Place looks good, he said, like he was doing me a favor by noticing. He didn't sit. He set a paper down on the table between us with the drama of a dealer placing a winning card. I swung by the bakery, he said, just to confirm everything for my records. He said it like someone who has records, the word puffed up with importance. He tapped the receipt with his finger. Boy, he said, chuckling, they really get you this time of year. He was smiling, but he hadn't looked at me yet. He was looking at the numbers. That's when I saw it. The way his expression changed like a string pulled from too tight to slack in one movement. His smile lowered slightly, not quite a frown, but something like it. He reread the receipt, lips moving. His hands, which are never still, went still. He swallowed. He set the paper down carefully, almost tenderly, as if it might break. "Caleb," he said, and there was something new in his voice, a note that made the air thinner. He broke off, eyes flicking to the top of the receipt and then back to me like he was triangulating a location. He took a breath like a swimmer coming up for air and glanced toward my living room, toward my bookshelf with its framed photos and tidy rows, toward the small, ordinary life I've built, as if he were seeing it for the first time. He tapped the paper again. He started, shaking his head slowly, and then tried again, softer now. "You didn't tell me you." I leaned back in my chair, coffee cooling at my elbow. The morning waiting. For the first time in a long time, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it expand between us, patient and calm. The kind of silence that asks a person to choose a side of themselves and step onto it. Evan's fingers tightened on the edge of the receipt. His hands, steady a moment ago, began to tremble in the smallest, unmistakable way. I didn't say anything. I just watched Evan stare at the bakery receipt like it had turned into a mirror and shown him something he didn't want to see. His thumb rubbed the paper so hard the ink began to blur under the heat of his skin. He tried to put the smile back on, the one he uses as a bridge to get across awkward moments without ever touching the water, but it kept slipping. He cleared his throat and picked up the paper again, like maybe a second look would rearrange the numbers into a friendlier shape. "You okay?" I asked, gentle, because I know him well enough to know you don't push when he's wobbling. He nodded too fast. Yeah, sure." He slid the receipt toward me like it was a hot plate he needed to get rid of. I'll Venmo you later. Got a bank transfer pending." The sentence was a familiar road he'd driven 100 times, but he drove it like his hands weren't on the wheel. Then he hugged me quick, one-armed, perfunctory, and left as abruptly as he came. Shoulders a little tighter, head a little lower. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "Did Evan swing by?" 3 dots appeared before I could answer. He said he did. I typed back that he had. Before I hit send, I watched 3 more dots bloom and fade. "He's sensitive lately," she wrote. "Be kind." There it was. The family thermostat turning itself down the moment Evan generated heat. Everyone else expected to put on a sweater and smile. By noon, the afterglow of Thanksgiving had drained out of the group chat and been replaced by photos, inside jokes, and small edits of history. Aunt Marie posted a filtered shot of the table, edges softened, reality smoothed, captioned, "What a perfect evening." Uncle Rob sent a blurry picture of the dog wearing a paper napkin like a cape. Sophia shared a clip of Evan carving the turkey with a flourish that made it look like he'd contributed more than volume. Then Evan chimed in, "Next year dinner on me," with a winking emoji. The same lie as always, dressed like a promise. I didn't respond. My father sent a thumbs-up reaction, which in our family is the equivalent of a notarized statement that he noticed the message and decided not to fight with it. In the afternoon, I took a walk and tried to let the cold sort my thoughts into boxes. The cheesecake, the receipt, the way Evan's hands had started to shake just a little, the way my mother's text had landed like an instruction manual for holding my tongue. When I got back, my phone had 5 missed calls. 2 from unknown numbers, 1 from Evan, 1 from my mother, 1 from a private number. I set the phone down. I made tea. The 6th call came while the kettle was still humming. I answered. "Caleb," my mother said without hello, which is how I knew she'd been on the phone with Evan first. "Your brother he's feeling he had a difficult morning." I could hear dishes clinking in the background. Her voice pitched somewhere between worry and performance. "He says you confronted him." I closed my eyes and pictured the way my mother stood when she was trying to turn a question into a scolding without changing any of the words. "No," I said, calm. "He stopped by." I gave him the receipt. Silence stretched. "It was expensive," she offered. "A test balloon. $96 is a lot for a cake." I let out a breath. "It is," I said. "It wasn't just the price." I stopped myself before I stepped over a line I wasn't ready to cross. "We agreed he'd settle up." My mother's voice softened, sugar added to a stew. "You know how he is with details." In our house, details was our family's way of describing anything with a due date, a bill, a boundary. "He's not careless," I said. "He's careful in the wrong direction." She exhaled like I'd said something uncharitable about a person she loved, which I had, because it was true. "Just be patient," she said. "He said he'd come by tomorrow. Maybe you two can talk like brothers, not like accountants." The last word came out like she was chewing on a lemon seed. "We'll talk," I said. "Love you." Love you, too, she replied a little too quickly, as if love were a full stop. An hour later, Evan texted. We good. A minute after that, can we do Sunday brunch? My treat. The words my treat squinted at me like they couldn't handle the light. I said yes. Not because I believed him, but because I'd learned that sometimes you let the play run long enough for the audience to understand the plot without you narrating it. On Sunday, the brunch place was the kind of spot with plants hanging from the ceiling and mugs that looked handmade. The hostess smiled in a way that suggested she could tell the difference between families who solved their arguments in the parking lot and ones who saved them for the table. Evan arrived wearing a jacket that could have either been expensive or just clean. He's good at purchasing the version of something that makes people think he's the version of himself he wants to be. He hugged me like nothing had happened and sat down like the apology had been pre-signed and notarized. We ordered. He talked. He has a fluent language for small triumphs that don't require verification, a client who loved his pitch, a big thing around the corner, a deal on the table. All of it bright words stretched over an empty frame. I listened and nodded. And when the server dropped the check with delicate end-of-scene timing, I watched Evan reach for it. My heart did a small, involuntary tilt of surprise. He opened it. He looked. Got it, he said aloud, like a person congratulating himself for being the person he wants to be. Then he patted his back pocket, then his jacket. The performance was so well rehearsed, I could have choreographed it with him, beat for beat. Oh, he said, frowning as if the universe had just wronged him. I must have left my card in my other jacket. He looked up with that sheepish charm people once found disarming. You mind? My stomach did that small, empty fall it has learned to recognize. The server stood nearby in polite limbo, holding a pen, watching the script she'd seen 100 times play out. I reached into my wallet, set my card down on the tray, and kept my voice level. I'll get this, I said, and you can send me your half today. He smiled too broadly. Absolutely. He tapped the table twice like a judge's gavel, concluding the ceremony. We stood, put on our coats, and stepped into the cold. On the sidewalk, he clapped my shoulder and said, You're a lifesaver. It came out automatic, old, unexamined. You can send it now, I said, not unkind, but with the precision of a person who has decided the new rule needs to be written in ink. Sure, he said, reaching for his phone. He scrolled, tapped, then paused theatrically. Ugh. My bank's text verification isn't coming through. Must be my service. He looked at his screen like it had betrayed him. I'll do it when I get home. Promise. I nodded. I didn't push. I had stopped pushing because I had started recording. By the time I returned home, I had 2 more missed calls, my mother and Aunt Marie. Aunt Marie left a voicemail that started cheerful and ended nosy. Sweetie, was brunch good? Evan said you two had such a nice time. A pause. He also mentioned you've been keeping track of things with numbers. The word numbers again, like it was a personality defect. We don't want to make everything transactional, she added. Family isn't a ledger. I stared at my wall for a moment and let the sentence sit next to the stack of payment reminders I draft for strangers who appreciate precision. That night, my father called. He doesn't call often without purpose. Walk with me, he said, which is his way of asking for a conversation that doesn't have to look like one. We looped the block twice, breath visible in the air. It's not that you're wrong, he said finally. It's that we've let it be this way so long that any correction feels unkind. I knew what he meant. Families fossilize around their bad habits. Prying them apart feels like breaking bone, even when you're doing a surgery. I don't want to fight, I said. I want a pattern to end. He nodded. Patterns end when people are ready to see them. We walked in silence. Our steps matched. Before we parted, he touched my shoulder. If you need me, he said, I'm here. It was the closest my father comes to saying, I see what you see. Monday morning, Evan's promised transfer hadn't appeared. No brunch money, no cheesecake money, no message. I sent him a calm text with both totals and the receipts attached. Friendly as a weather report. Hey, here's the amount from brunch yesterday and the cheesecake from Thursday. $96 plus $28.50 equals $124.50. Please send today. He replied with a thumbs up. Late afternoon, he sent a screenshot of his banking app processing. The timestamp was cropped halfway. I didn't reply. I set a reminder to follow up in 24 hours. That small decision, to treat this like a normal bill, not a family favor, must have triggered an alarm in the system of our family because my mother called within the hour. Sweetie, she began, the voice she uses when she's trying to wrap me in a blanket before taking the blanket away. Do you need the money right now? Because if this is tight for you, Dad and I I cut her off gently. I'm fine. This isn't about tight. It's about right. The line went quiet. Okay, she said after a moment. I don't like tension. That made me smile despite myself. You love tension, I said, as long as it's polite. She sighed, but she laughed too, because she knows I'm not wrong. Please don't be hard on him, she added, small and soft. He's had a lot of stressors. I thought of the jacket, the brunch, the screenshots cropped at the edges. We all have, I said. By Wednesday, Evan had transformed my reminders into my fault. He texted, not a great week to lean on me. I stared at the words. Lean on me. The inversion sat heavy in my chest. I typed erased, typed again, then settled on, I'm not leaning on you. I'm asking you to fulfill your word. He replied with the digital equivalent of a shrug. You're being intense. Another message, Mom says you're turning into Dad. The implication was clear. Dad with his budgets and his schedules and his quiet disapproval of chaos. In our family mythology, Mom is warmth and Dad is winter. The irony? Dad is the only reason the house stayed warm. Thursday evening, Sophia FaceTimed me. She doesn't pick sides, she picks truth. He called me, she said, eyes tired, hair up. He's spiraling a little. Says you ambushed him. Showed him something at your place. I rubbed my temple. I showed him a receipt. She tilted her head. That's not the part he's spiraling about. My chest went still. What part then? She hesitated, weighing loyalty against accuracy. He said it had information on it. Something he didn't expect to see. He wouldn't say what, but he sounded spooked. I was quiet long enough that she filled the space. Look, I love him, but he's been living in a house where every mirror is flattering. He saw a real one, and now he's mad at the mirror. I exhaled. That sounds right. She leaned in, softening. Whatever you're doing, do it carefully. People who are used to getting away with things don't go quiet when you set a boundary. They get louder. Evan did get louder, just not to me. He posted a cryptic status on social media about loyalty not being a spreadsheet. Cousins liked it. Aunt Marie commented a string of hearts and prayer hands. A friend of his chimed in with, always there for you, bro. I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself in a comment section built for slogans. I kept saving receipts. Friday, he called with a new idea. Let's make it simple, he said, salesman smooth. I'll bring you cash. We'll square up the cheesecake and brunch and a few of the old times, and then we're clean. Old times. The phrase was a hallway he hoped I'd walk down and get lost in. Okay, I said. Sunday afternoon. He agreed too quickly. Perfect. I'll be there at 2 o'clock. Sunday arrived, frosted and bright. I spent the morning straightening the apartment the way you do when you're trying to organize your thoughts by organizing your books. At 1:58, my phone buzzed. Parking now. At 2:07, another. Be right up. At 2:22, the knock. He came in wearing that cologne he wears when he wants to smell like a good decision. He had cash in his hand, folded once, a small, thick rectangle. He set it on the table like a peace offering. There, he said, proud. See, not a big deal. The way he said it made it smaller on purpose. I counted it. It was exactly $100. I waited. He waited too, smiling as if the rest of the money were hiding under the table, waiting to surprise us. $124.50, I said. Plus the older amounts you mentioned. His smile tightened. Right. I figured we'd start here. And he dusted his hands of the parts he didn't want to articulate and keep it light. He tried to push the cash across the table with 2 fingers like it would grow under my hands. Evan, I said, quiet but firm, we're not keeping it light. We're keeping it accurate. He huffed a laugh that didn't sound like laughter. You really are turning into Dad. He sat back, thinking, then leaned forward suddenly, elbows on knees, eyes narrow. You know what the real problem is? You've started making me look bad. The sentence should have been a joke, but it wasn't. I used to be able to count on you to be easy, he said. Now you're different. He gestured around my apartment like it contained the answer. Is it because you've got your little business? Because you think you're above me now? I blinked. No, I said, it's because I've started treating myself like someone I know. He rolled his eyes so hard I thought they'd ache later. He stood, pacing. You know, it's funny, he said, not sounding amused. I went back to that bakery just to, line things up. And I saw something on that receipt that didn't make sense at first. He stopped pacing, looked at me, and smiled in a way that wasn't warm. Do you know what I'm talking about? He wanted a reaction. I worked very hard not to give him one. It's a receipt, I said. What could be confusing? He chuckled to himself. A private joke. Yeah, he said softly. What could be confusing? He tapped the table twice, then pressed his hands flat on it and leaned down. You should be careful, little brother, he said, almost affectionate, and not at all. Sometimes numbers tell stories people don't want told. The way he said it made the room tilt just a degree. A breeze of something colder passed through us. I felt the old family instinct rise in me. Asterisk, smooth it over. Make it nice. Pretend the knife is a spoon. Asterisk, I didn't. I sat very still and let him feel the weight of someone who wasn't going to rush in and rescue him from a mess he'd kicked over himself. He straightened, fished his phone from his pocket, and shot a photo of the cash on the table like he needed proof he'd been generous. I'll bring the rest tomorrow, he said. Maybe I'll bring Mom, too. She misses you. The last part was a dart wrapped in lace. After he left, I sat at the table with a stack of receipts, groceries I'd covered, event tickets I'd bought in the old days, a dog grooming bill he'd spot me till Friday for 3 summers ago, laid out like a paper city. I wasn't angry as much as I was awake. It's a strange feeling when you realize that the fog you've been living inside isn't weather, it's a habit. I texted Sophia. He came by, brought cash, said something weird about the receipt. She wrote back immediately. Define weird. I typed, deleted, typed again. He hinted it shows something. Wouldn't say what. 3 dots thrummed on the screen. Do you want me to ask him? She wrote. I hesitated. Not yet. Monday afternoon, my mother texted. Can we come by tonight? Dad too. All of you. I replied. Yes, she wrote. Evan said we should all sit down and clear the air. Clear the air in our family often meant opening a window and pretending the smoke wasn't coming from the stove. 7, I wrote. I'll order coffee. We'll bring pie, she replied, as if sugar could staple a conversation together. At 6:58, I heard their voices in the hall, my mother's anxious patter, my father's low murmur, Evan's bright commentary. They filed in like a committee visiting a site. My mother put a pie on the counter as if she were baptizing the room. My father shook my hand with that quiet pressure that says I'm here even when I'm not speaking. Evan moved like a director placing actors on a stage. We sat. The pie remained untouched. The air was polite and thick. Caleb, my mother began, hands folded. We're here because we all love each other, and we don't want unpleasantness. Evan nodded solemnly, like a man presiding over a meeting he had graciously agreed to attend. My father watched me. He does that when he wants me to know I'm allowed to hold my ground. This feels like a lot of ceremony for a cheesecake, I said, half smile to keep the temperature down. It's not about the cheesecake, Evan said quickly, leaning forward. It's about transparency. He said the word like he just learned it. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded paper, and placed it on the table between us slowly, deliberately, like it was Exhibit A. It's about what's on that receipt, he said, eyes on me, voice suddenly calm in a way that felt practiced. And how it changes things. He tapped the paper with one finger. His hand was steady now. Mine wasn't. I looked at my father. He was very still, the way someone is when they know a wave is about to hit, and they're trying to measure its height before it does. I reached for the paper. My fingers brushed the edge. Evan's smile widened by a fraction, like a person who had been waiting hours to open a door and had finally heard the key slide into the lock. And right there, hand on the edge of whatever story he thought he was about to tell with my numbers, I stopped. Evan's folded paper sat between us like a lit fuse. My mother's hands fluttered near her lap, not touching the table, as if she wanted to reach out and smooth the whole scene down, but knew better than to touch it yet. My father didn't move. He just watched, eyes narrowed the way they get when he's measuring something invisible. I slid the paper toward me, unfolded it, and felt my stomach go hollow. It wasn't just the bakery receipt. It was the bakery receipt stapled to a photocopy of my bank statement. My private bank statement. I froze, staring at the columns of numbers, the logo of my bank at the top, the neat listing of deposits and balances. I knew instantly what Evan had seen, what had made his hand shake the first time. He had spotted the line that didn't belong in his version of me. The wire transfer from a client that was more than he had made in an entire year. 6 figures, clean and simple. It was there in black and white, and he had stapled it to a receipt like it was Exhibit A in a case against me. Where did you get this? I asked, voice low, careful. My throat felt dry. The words scraped out of me. My mother shifted uncomfortably. Evan said you showed him. No. I cut in, sharper than I meant to. I didn't show him this. Evan leaned back in his chair, arms spread like a man settling into a throne. You left it out, he said smoothly. On the table. When you gave me the cheesecake receipt, you didn't think I'd notice. You've been sitting here acting like Mr. Responsible, Mr. Ledger Book. But all this time, he tapped the numbers with the tip of his finger. You've been hiding money. Serious money. From us. I blinked at him, heat rising in my chest. From you. I said slowly. Why would my earnings be something I owe you? My mother gasped softly. My father stayed silent. But Evan leaned forward, his eyes bright with something ugly. Because. You let us believe you were just scraping by. You let Mom cover things. You let me carry the narrative that you were the frugal little brother. But here, he pushed the paper closer, almost triumphant. Here's the truth. You've got plenty. You've been sitting on it while I. He stumbled just a little, but caught himself. While we thought you were one of us. One of us. I repeated, voice cold now. You mean someone you could lean on and never pay back? Someone you could manipulate with pity. His smile slipped for the first time. Don't twist it. You think this makes you better? You think having money means you get to treat family like clients? He looked at my mother, searching for backup. You see this, right? He's been lying, keeping secrets. My mother's voice trembled. Caleb, why didn't you tell us? Why hide it? Her eyes weren't angry, just wounded, confused. That hurt more than Evan's accusations. I didn't tell you, I said, trying to steady my voice, because it's mine. Because I've worked for it. And because the moment Evan saw a number he didn't like, I knew he'd turn it into this. I gestured at the paper. Evan scoffed, leaning back again, but his hands were tight fists on his knees. You think you can sit there and play victim? You've been hoarding while this family struggled. You mean while you kept borrowing and never paying back? I shot back. You're not entitled to my bank account, Evan. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father finally spoke, his voice deep and steady. You had no right to dig into his finances. His gaze locked on Evan. And for once, my brother didn't meet his eyes. But instead of backing down, Evan shifted, angry energy crackling off him. No right? Or no right to notice what he's been hiding. He's not the saint you all make him out to be. He's been sitting on a fortune and letting us all believe he was just normal. The word normal landed like an insult. My mother's lips pressed together. My father's jaw worked tight. And me? I sat there with my own bank statement on the table, exposed, my brother grinning like he'd finally found the lever that would tilt the whole family in his direction. And then Evan said the line that changed everything. He leaned in, dropped his voice, and said, You know what, Caleb? Maybe if you'd just shared, maybe if you'd actually acted like family, I wouldn't have had to show them. But now, he looked around the table, meeting every pair of eyes but mine. Now everyone knows the truth. He's been holding out on us. That was the moment. The betrayal wasn't just the paper or the invasion or the exposure. It was the way he set us. He had drawn a line across the table, left me on one side, and tried to pull my own parents to his. He wasn't just coming for my money. He was coming for my place in my own family. And in the silence that followed, as the words settled and the room turned heavy, I felt something shift inside me. Something that had been patient, forgiving, always making excuses. Something that in that moment finally broke. I didn't speak. Not yet. I just sat back, stared at my brother, and let him think for one dangerous heartbeat that maybe he had one. And that's exactly when the air in the room changed. My brother sat there with my bank statement like he'd unearthed buried treasure, smug in the glow of his own betrayal. While my parents' silence stretched longer and longer across the table, my mother looked at me with that wounded expression I've only ever seen when she's convinced someone has betrayed the idea of family first. My father's gaze flicked between us, jaw tight, but he didn't speak. And me? I felt like the ground under my chair had shifted. The numbers on that paper weren't just numbers anymore. They were the wedge Evan had driven between me and the people I had worked hardest to respect. It was a strange, hollow kind of pain. Not rage, not even humiliation, just this deep ache of recognition that my brother had finally crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He hadn't just borrowed without paying back. He hadn't just leaned on me, manipulated me, or pulled me into his endless theater of excuses. He had reached into my private life, stripped it bare, and then weaponized it in front of the people whose opinions still carried weight in my chest. He'd made me look like the dishonest one. I should have shouted, slammed my fist on the table, demanded the truth of how he even got hold of my bank statement in the first place. But all I did was sit there. My silence, I realized, was louder than anything I could have said. My mother mistook that silence for guilt. She turned to me, eyes watery, voice soft, like she was already bracing for my apology. Why didn't you tell us, Caleb? Why hide it? We're your family. The way she said it, Hide it, like I'd been scheming instead of surviving, saving, working. My throat closed. I didn't hide anything, I said quietly, but the words fell flat. My father's lips twitched like he wanted to say something, but then his hands settled on the armrest and stayed there. It felt like being abandoned in slow motion. Evan seized on the silence like a lifeline. See? He can't even defend himself. He knows it's wrong. He leaned back, eyes scanning the room as if expecting applause. All this time, he let us believe he was just scraping by. Meanwhile, he's sitting on, what was it? 200 grand? 3. He looked right at me, smirking, daring me to correct him. And he didn't say a word. Not to Mom, not to Dad. Not even to me. Some brother. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. He didn't just accuse me of selfishness. He reframed my hard work as secrecy, my privacy as betrayal. And in that moment, I realized it was working. My mother's shoulders slumped like she'd been tricked. My father's face, unreadable, was worse because I couldn't tell if he was angry at Evan or disappointed in me. The conversation after that wasn't really a conversation. It was Evan talking, weaving his story, and me absorbing the blows without raising a hand. He spoke about the times he covered for me when I was younger, small, ancient favors he inflated into debts I had never acknowledged. He painted a picture of himself as the struggling, honest brother, contrasted against the one who had hidden success. He even had the nerve to call me calculating. And as much as my father finally interjected here and there, "That's enough, Evan," or "Don't twist this," the damage had already been done. The seed of doubt had been planted. When the meeting finally ended, my parents left with the pie untouched. My mother hugged me, but it was hesitant, heavy, her cheek cold against mine. "We'll talk later," she whispered. My father just pressed my shoulder and left. And Evan? He smirked on his way out the door, leaning in to murmur so only I could hear. "Guess we're even now, little brother." Even. The word rattled around in my skull as the door closed. Even, like exposing me and twisting my family's view of me somehow balanced out decades of his debts, his manipulation, his parasitic habits. Even like we were back at zero. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the same receipts I'd laid out before, but now they looked different. They didn't look like proof anymore. They looked like clutter. Evan had taken the one thing I prided myself on, order, honesty, precision, and made it look dirty. And worse, my family had half believed him. For the first time in years, I felt small again. Small like the kid who used to cover for his older brother's mistakes. Who used to smooth things over so Mom wouldn't cry. Who used to keep quiet so Dad wouldn't explode. That kid had grown up into a man who thought he'd built something strong enough to withstand all that. But sitting there in the silence of my apartment, I realized how fragile it still was. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Evan's voice again, repeating those words, asterisk, "You've been hiding it. He's been holding out on us, asterisk." By morning, I made a decision. Not a loud one. Not even a fully formed one, but a quiet, stubborn one. I wasn't going to let Evan define me. Not to my parents, not to Sophia, not to anyone else. I wasn't going to let this betrayal be the last word. I started small. I pulled out a fresh notebook, the kind I usually reserve for new clients, and wrote at the top of the first page, "What Evan owes." Beneath it, I listed every loan, every dinner, every "I'll get you later," every penny I could prove. Then I flipped the page and wrote what he's taken: privacy, trust, reputation, family peace. I didn't know what the plan was yet, but I knew this. The math had to balance eventually. Still, the days that followed were heavy. Calls from my mother felt shorter, clipped, polite. My father texted once, a simple, "Hope you're okay," with no follow-up. And Evan, he went quiet, which was worse than noise. It meant he was building something. I walked around in those days like a ghost, half present, half consumed by the echo of what had happened. My work suffered. I stared at spreadsheets until the numbers blurred. My sleep broke into fragments. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined my mother's expression when Evan said he's been hiding money. That was my rock bottom. Not the betrayal itself, but the realization that it had worked. That for the first time, my family believed him more than me. And yet, even in that hollow place, I felt something begin to shift. Something that wasn't forgiveness, wasn't surrender, wasn't resignation. Something sharper, colder. I didn't know it yet, but Evan's betrayal had given me something I hadn't had in years, a reason to stop just surviving his games. A reason to plan. And I started to, quietly, patiently, in the dark. The weeks after that meeting were heavy in a way I can only describe as quiet grief. Not the kind you cry out loud about, but the kind that makes you question whether the floor under your feet will ever feel steady again. My mother's voice on the phone was cooler, my father's text shorter, and Evan's silence hung over everything like a storm cloud waiting for the right wind. For a while, I carried it all on my shoulders. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, life began to tilt in a new direction. At first, I buried myself in work, not to escape, but to prove to myself that Evan's story didn't define me. My bookkeeping practice, which had always been steady, began to flourish in a way I hadn't anticipated. A restaurant group I'd been courting for months finally signed on. And within 2 weeks, they referred me to 2 of their partners. 1 contract turned into 3. 3 turned into 7. Suddenly, my phone was ringing more than I could answer. My inbox filled with clients who weren't just paying me on time, they were thanking me for the peace of mind I brought them. It felt surreal. For years, I'd been the family's quiet problem solver, the one who smoothed edges and kept things running without recognition. Now, for the first time, strangers were telling me outright, "You're good at this. You make things easier. You matter." The validation didn't erase the betrayal, but it began to stack up, brick by brick, into something that looked like confidence. With the extra income, I started doing things I'd put off for years. I upgraded my office from a cramped corner in my apartment to a shared workspace downtown with big windows that let in the morning light. I hired an assistant, just part-time at first, to handle scheduling and client calls. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving my work. I was building something, a business that wasn't fragile, wasn't secret, wasn't dependent on anyone's permission. My personal life began to stretch out too. I joined a local running group, something I'd always said I was too busy for. I reconnected with Sophia outside of the family gatherings, and she became one of my fiercest supporters. Over coffee one afternoon, she said, "You know, you've always been the steady one. You just forgot to be steady for yourself." The words hit me hard because she was right. I had spent years giving stability to people who thrived on chaos, and now I was finally turning that energy inward. The strangest part? The more I grew, the less Evan's voice echoed in my head. At first, I thought of him constantly, his smirk, his accusation, the way he said us and left me on the other side. But as weeks turned into months, his grip on my thoughts loosened. Not gone, not forgiven, but quieter, duller, like a scar that no longer throbs. Only itches when the weather changes. But power has a way of making itself visible, even when you don't announce it. My parents began to notice. My mother called one evening, her tone hesitant but curious. "Your father mentioned your business is doing well," she asked, as if the question itself was dangerous. I told her the truth, that it was thriving, that I was busier than I'd ever been, that I was even thinking of hiring another assistant. There was a long pause. "I'm proud of you," she said finally. And though the words were simple, they carried the weight of someone beginning to see me outside of Evan's shadow. My father, more subtle, showed his acknowledgement in his own way. One Saturday, he asked if I'd look over his retirement accounts, something he'd never trusted anyone else with. "I want your eyes on it," he said. Just that. But it meant more than an entire speech. Meanwhile, Evan's silence had stretched on. He wasn't calling, wasn't showing up, wasn't pulling his usual stunts. At first, I thought it meant he was lying in wait, planning another ambush. But then I started hearing whispers. Sophia mentioned he'd asked her for money. A cousin let slip that he'd posted about bad luck with his business venture. And then one day, my mother called, and her voice cracked in a way that told me the truth without her saying it. "He's been struggling," she admitted. "Things haven't been easy." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to, because by then, my life had already begun to rise on its own. The more Evan stumbled, the more I realized I no longer needed his validation, or even my parents, to define my worth. I was standing taller, not because I'd beaten him, but because I had finally stopped letting him dictate the terms of my life. But the real turning point came quietly, in the form of an invitation. A client whose books I'd cleaned up so thoroughly they called me a magician with spreadsheets asked if I would speak at a small business seminar about financial management. At first I laughed, standing in front of a room giving advice. But I said yes. And when I stood there that day, talking about numbers and order and responsibility, I saw people nodding, taking notes, hanging on my words. For the first time, my voice wasn't just something Evan mocked or twisted. It was something people respected. I walked out of that seminar with a new understanding. Power isn't always about who talks the loudest at the dinner table. Sometimes it's about who builds quietly until their foundation is so strong no one can knock it down. And yet, Just as my life was beginning to bloom, Evan found a way to reappear. Not through a phone call, not through a family dinner, but through something far more dangerous. Something that told me his silence hadn't been surrender. It had been preparation. Because one evening as I was closing up my office, I found an envelope slipped under my door. My name written across the front in Evan's unmistakable handwriting. Inside, a single sheet of paper, and what was written there made me realize the real storm hadn't even begun. The envelope was thin, almost weightless, but my pulse quickened as I unfolded the paper inside. It wasn't just a letter. It was a photocopy of another bank record. Only this time, it wasn't mine. It was Evan's. The numbers told a story louder than any speech he could have made. Overdrafts piling up, credit card balances bleeding into 5 figures, late fees stacked like bricks. His signature scrolled at the bottom of one page proved it was real. For a moment, I just sat there, the fluorescent hum of my office lights filling the silence. He had delivered this himself. That was what unsettled me. Evan, who had weaponized my private numbers against me, had now left his own dirty laundry at my door. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But no, Evan wasn't careless like that. He was dramatic. He wanted me to see it. He wanted me to know he was drowning. And in his twisted way, maybe he thought it was leverage, a cry for help disguised as a dare. I tucked the papers into a folder, locked them in my desk, and left the office that night with a weight I hadn't felt before. Because information was power, and for once, the ledger wasn't tilted in his favor. The next week only reinforced that shift. My business kept growing. A new client, a mid-sized construction company, asked me to manage a full audit of their financials. It was grueling work, but the kind of work that put my name in rooms I'd never been in before. Suddenly, other companies in the city, larger, more influential, were reaching out. One lunch with the CEO turned into an invitation to join a professional network. Within a month, I had more influence than I'd ever dreamed possible. Not influence like Evan craved, flashy cars, borrowed charm, quick wins, but the kind that was steady, practical, rooted in trust. It was around then that Sophia dropped a piece of information into my lap like it was casual gossip. We were sitting in a cafe, her stirring tea absent-mindedly when she said, "You know Evan's been talking to Mom about asking you for an investment, right?" I froze. Investment? She nodded, not looking up. He's been spinning some story about a startup idea. Wants to make it sound legit. Says, if you really cared about family, you'd back him. She finally glanced at me, eyes apologetic. Mom almost believes him. Dad doesn't. I leaned back in my chair, the noise of the cafe fading into a dull buzz. That's when it clicked. The envelope hadn't been a mistake. It was groundwork. Evan was trying to position himself as desperate but visionary, the struggling genius who just needed one good break. He thought if I saw his debts, I'd panic, feel guilty, and step in. He wanted me to play the role of savior again. But what he hadn't counted on was that I was no longer the same Caleb. I had the receipts, literally. His financial chaos was laid out in black and white. I knew how deep the hole was. And now, with my growing reputation, I also had something else, the ability to expose him if I chose, if he tried to corner me with his startup pitch. I could dismantle it piece by piece with evidence no one could argue against. That night, I spread Evan's bank records across my desk alongside the folder of my own receipts from years past. 2 cities on a map. One showing the trail of what he owed me, the other showing the canyon he dug for himself. For the first time, I didn't feel like the younger brother stuck in his shadow. I felt like the one holding the light. The next morning, opportunity presented itself. My father called, voice low and deliberate as though he'd been waiting for the right moment. "Your mother's worried," he said. "Evan's been circling her with this business idea. She wants to believe him. I don't, but she needs proof. Caleb, proof that he's not what he says he is." It was a strange reversal. My father, who had always been the silent observer, was now asking me for help. Not to keep the peace, not to let it go, but to bring clarity. "Do you have proof?" he asked. I glanced at the folder on my desk. "Yes," I said. "I do." And in that moment, I realized the setup had been handed to me. Evan thought he was scripting the story, but he'd left me with the tools to rewrite it. I wasn't ready to strike just yet. Revenge wasn't about anger. It was about timing. And as I looked at the growing empire of clients, the trust of my father, and the folder of evidence sitting in front of me, I knew I was in the strongest position I had ever been. All that remained was patience. Let Evan make his move. Let him think he was in control. And when the time was right, the truth would land so hard it would leave no room for excuses, no room for charm, no room for escape. Because for once, the math was on my side. And that's when the call came from my mother. Her voice was shaky, caught between hope and fear. "Caleb," she whispered, "your brother wants us all to meet. He says he has something big to propose. Please just come. Don't shut him out." I looked at the folder on my desk, then out the window at the city I was slowly conquering. "Of course," I said. "I'll be there." And I knew then that meeting would be where the balance finally shifted. The meeting was set for Sunday evening at my parents' house. The same table where Evan had first turned my bank statement into his weapon. I arrived a few minutes early, carrying nothing but a slim leather folder tucked under my arm. My father answered the door, gave me one steady look, and nodded like he already knew I had come prepared. My mother fluttered around, anxious, but hopeful. The kind of hope that's more about clinging to a picture than believing in reality. Evan arrived last, of course. He swept in wearing a blazer that didn't quite fit and cologne that entered the room before he did. He hugged my mother, slapped my father's shoulder, and gave me a smile that was all teeth. "Glad you came, little brother," he said, as if he were the host. We sat. My mother poured tea, though her hands trembled enough that she spilled a few drops on the saucer. Evan cleared his throat and launched into his pitch with the flair of a man who had rehearsed in the mirror. He spoke about a revolutionary business idea, about untapped markets, about family legacy. His words were flashy, full of buzzwords, empty of substance. And then he pivoted. "What I need," he said smoothly, "is someone who understands numbers. Someone who knows how to handle the boring details while I drive the vision. Caleb, you're perfect for that role. And of course, I'd need an initial investment. Just a loan, really. Family helping family. We could both profit." He leaned back, smiling like the deal was already sealed. My mother looked at me with pleading eyes, silently urging me to say yes. My father watched Evan with the stillness of a hawk. I waited a beat, then another, letting the silence stretch. Finally, I opened my folder and slid a stack of papers onto the table. Evan's smile faltered. "These," I said calmly, "are your current bank statements, overdraft fees, credit card balances, missed payments." I didn't go digging, Evan. You handed these to me yourself. I flipped to the next sheet, steady, deliberate. "And this is a record of every dollar you've borrowed from me over the last 10 years. The totals are precise. The dates, the amounts, all here." I let the papers sit between us like a mirror. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father's jaw tightened, but his eyes didn't leave Evan. Evan laughed, thin and sharp. "You're really going to do this here? To me? To your family?" "No," I said, my voice calm, even. "I'm going to do this for our family. Because you've been lying for years. Because every time you said, 'I'll pay you back,' you didn't. Because every time you cried, 'Bad luck,' you weren't unlucky. You were reckless. And now you want to drag all of us into your hole and call it a business venture." I leaned forward, my voice still steady but sharper now. "Not this time. Not again." My father broke the silence first. "Is it true?" he asked Evan, voice low, deliberate. "Are these your numbers?" Evan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. His hands twitched like he wanted to crumple the papers, but he didn't dare touch them. "It's not." "Look, numbers don't tell the whole story," he stammered. "They tell enough," my father said. His tone left no room for debate. My mother looked between us, torn, but even she couldn't deny what was printed in black and white. "Evan," she whispered. "How could you?" Her words trailed off into silence. Evan's bravado cracked. He tried one last desperate play. "Fine. You think you're so much better than me, Caleb? Sitting on your money, acting like you're some saint? Without me, this family would be boring. Dead. I'm the one who brings life." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "What you bring," I said quietly, "is debt, lies, and shame." The words hung in the air like a verdict. For the first time in years, I saw my parents' faces shift, not in confusion, not in doubt, but in recognition. They were finally seeing Evan for who he was. And they were seeing me not as the younger brother meant to clean up the mess, but as the one who had the strength to end it. I gathered the papers back into my folder, stood, and looked directly at Evan. "You wanted transparency? Here it is. No more borrowing. No more pretending. If you want to climb out of the hole you've dug, you'll do it yourself. But you won't do it with my money, my time, or my silence." I turned to my parents. "I love you both. But if you keep bailing him out, you're just choosing to live in his storm. I won't." And with that, I tucked the folder under my arm and walked out, leaving Evan pale and sputtering at the table, my parents stunned into silence. As I stepped into the cold night air, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because it was over, it wasn't. Evan would lash out, I knew that, but because for once, the script wasn't his anymore. And what happened next would prove just how far he was willing to fall. The fallout came faster than I expected. Within a week, Evan's carefully spun web began to unravel. He had built his life on charm, on convincing people that his next idea was the one that would finally pay off. But charm only lasts as long as people are willing to suspend their disbelief. And after that night, the disbelief was gone. My father cut him off first. He called me the next morning, his voice firm, almost weary. "We're done carrying him," he said. I should have done it years ago. And true to his word, he stopped answering Evan's calls about loans and emergencies. My mother, slower to break free, still tried to rationalize it first. But after Evan turned up at her door with a story about a stolen wallet, one she'd heard before, she finally saw it for what it was. She handed him a sandwich, told him she loved him, and then closed the door without handing over a cent. She called me afterward in tears. "I never thought I'd have to do that to my own son," she said. "But I realize now I've been enabling him." The rest of the family followed suit. Sophia, who had been patient longer than anyone, stopped picking up when Evan's name lit up her phone. Our cousins, once entertained by his antics, grew tired of the endless cycle of excuses. Even Uncle Rob, who had always laughed off Evan's charm, muttered at the next family dinner, "Man's got to learn to stand on his own 2 feet sometime." And Evan, without the safety net he'd relied on for years, started to stumble publicly. He was evicted from his apartment after missing too many payments. His so-called business venture fizzled before it even began, the people he had promised to recruit backing out the moment they realized there was no real plan behind his words. His car, the one he paraded around to prove he was doing fine, was repossessed in broad daylight. People noticed. His image cracked. He called me once late at night, voice slurred with anger and desperation. "You think you won?" he hissed. "You turned them against me. You destroyed me." I listened in silence until he ran out of words. And then I said the only thing I could. "No, Evan, you destroyed yourself. I just stopped hiding it for you." Then I hung up. That was the last time I answered his calls. Meanwhile, my own life only grew steadier. My business expanded into something I could be proud of, something that no one could take away from me. My parents, once distant, began to rebuild trust with me little by little. My father asked for advice more often. My mother, though still aching, began to see that boundaries weren't cruelty. They were clarity. And for the first time in years, when I walked into a family gathering, I wasn't the younger brother in Evan's shadow. I was my own man, standing on ground I had built myself. Months later, I saw Evan by chance. He was standing outside a pawn shop, his blazer worn thin, his face tired. The charm drained out of him. He saw me, but didn't wave. His eyes held mine for a moment, then dropped to the ground. For the first time, I didn't feel pity or guilt or anger. I just felt distance. A distance I had earned. As I walked away, I thought about that folder of receipts I'd once guarded so carefully. I didn't need it anymore. The numbers had already told their story. And the story ended with this simple truth. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for yourself, and even for others, is to finally, truly, let the truth add up. So, tell me, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to draw a line with a family member like that? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.